What keeps you awake at night?
Sea levels are rising globally.
Fears fueled by horror stories.
Among the worst flu season in a decade, and it hasn't peaked yet.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous.
Another series of deadly terror attacks.
I don't want to be blamed if you cannot get to sleep tonight.
Welcome to Things That Keep Me Up at Night.
Welcome back.
So this is the podcast where we talk about things that keep us up at night.
We sure do.
Things that make us lose sleep. Quick intro before we do this. If you listen to the last recording, you may wonder to yourself where Brie went.
Okay. So let it be known that I am a 20-year-old woman who has no idea how technology works. The fact that I can pull up Discord and actually record my voice on 2 separate devices is a miracle from God himself. So, we had some trouble starting up, and you know what? I can hold my hands up and say, my B, alright? That was my bad. But we've learned.
Yeah, when I was editing it, I synced up all the audio, and I was, looking visually at what I needed to cut, and realized that her audio was 30 minutes shorter than our audio.
Oof.
And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And realized that not the end. If the end had been cut off, that would have been weird, but understandable because it cut out. But the middle third part cut out, and then she came back. So I worked movie magic, and I got it to sound like a normal podcast. The only problem is Brie disappears for 25 minutes.
Oh, well.
But it sounds fine. It sounds like Brooke and I are talking and being really wordy, but whenever Brie got involved, I was like, well, that's going to have to go. Cut out 2 conversations we had, but it is what it is. I didn't want to record it again. So life is good. We're recording this one this time, and this week Brie is presenting something that keeps her up at night.
What keeps you up at night, Brie? Okay, so first and foremost, I'm so excited to be presenting this because it is a topic that I've been obsessed with for a really long time. So without further ado, let's intro this. So when Olivia first brought up the idea of groupthink as what we'd be doing for our first series of episodes, I got excited, alright? I'm obsessed with everything to do with groupthink and quote-unquote sheeple. I spent days brainstorming topics and bounced around the idea of cults for a while. I really love cults. However, I came to the conclusion that cults would need a whole episode of their own, a whole series of episodes, to be quite frank, to fully grasp how fucked up that shit truly is. It's really hard to tune down because I can talk about cults for literal days. But then I finally came up with a perfect fucked up idea. Now, before I tell you what my topic is, I feel like it's only fair to give a clear definition of groupthink and what it really is so we can all be on the same page, roughly. Alright? So, groupthink is defined as a pattern of thought characterized by self-deception, forced manufacture of consent, and conformity to group values and ethics. Now, it's vital that we remember this definition because I think we can break this down even further towards the end of our podcast when we actually dive into the topic. So, now that we have a clear definition, we can relate groupthink to one of the most fucked up experiments of all time. Today, we're going to be talking about the absolute shit show that was the Stanford Prison Experiment. I knew it!
I knew it! There was something to do. She read this book, and it's called The Lucifer Effect, and I fucking knew it was going to be something to do with the Lucifer Effect. But I'm so excited because I barely know anything about this topic.
Yep.
The
Lucifer Effect is written by Phillip Zimbardo, who is the head of the experiment, which took place during the 70s, the Stanford Prison Experiment. And I highly recommend getting this book. If you can pirate it or get it in some illegal way and not support Phillip Zimbardo, that would be even better, because, let's be honest, he's profiting off of it, and he's a piece of shit. I don't like the man. What did he do? He was the person who ran the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Oh, shit. I thought he was someone who wrote something about it. Okay, well.
No. He was
I'm a fucking idiot.
Because it's great, because the Lucifer Effect is obviously a first-hand account of what actually happened during the Stanford Prison Experiment. But it also isn't just about the Stanford Prison Experiment. It ties into different forms of groupthink and ties into today's culture, which I have highlighted and we'll dive into. It's very, very dark. I will warn you that there's a lot of rape, sexual assault, stuff like that involved. Very dark stuff. Read it on the plane. And the person next to me sitting on the plane was not happy about the content I was reading.
Listen, all I'm saying is maybe he's a fucked up man.
Maybe
he's made some mistakes. Okay,
We
right.
all do things.
But
like,
on
come
the other hand, he also taught us a lot about evil.
Right.
Yay.
So that's what we also need to
Take.
remember. So diving into this, first and foremost, what exactly is the Stanford Prison Experiment? For those of you who don't know, the Stanford Prison Experiment, on its most basic level, is a psychological experiment that purpose was to study how beings being placed in different social roles would affect how a person behaved specifically in a prison setting. And I tried to look up what was the source of Phillip Zimbardo actually starting this experiment, and I believe the government actually came to him to highlight how the prison system that was in the United States wasn't as bad as it was cracked out to be. Which
Whoops.
kind of proved
accidentally became the most infamous indictment of the prison system in history.
Absolutely.
Big yikes.
So the purpose of the study was was specifically for a prison setting. They did this by picking 24 men and dividing them equally into two groups, the guards and the prisoners. The plan was to run the experiment for a total of 14 days and simply monitor their behavior. They were told to act like guards, to act like prisoners, and see what would happen. Unfortunately, the experiment was cut short, only lasting for 6 days, to the amount of psychological trauma that the participants faced. Now cited as one, if not the most notorious psychological experiment of all time. And we're about to see why.
Yay!
So, let's dive into exactly the man behind it all, Phillip Zimbardo. Now, I personally, not a fan. Coming from somebody who's studied this experiment, done a lot of research on it, he's kind of a shitty person.
Great.
Regardless of the fact of if he was involved in the idea of groupthink, right? Because he said at the end of his book that he himself, as a human being, had to be biased in the sense that he had to be part of the experiment where he himself was vile to manipulating people, to using them to his advantage, which is basically the experiment even took over him as a professor of psychology for years, right? But I think that's a little bit bullshit. Because he set up the experiment. He knew what he was going into. He was the one who planned it all out. He was the one who set things up. His rules and regulations weren't concise. The thing that I will say going into this is that as a man of science, I firmly believe in the process of the scientific method, alright? And
Sure.
with every firm experiment that is set up, there has to be some form of variables that you can test, right? There needs to be some form of conciseness that can be tested throughout, and some consistency that can be tested regularly throughout other experiments, right? Because if you don't have that, it's not a fucking experiment. Phillip Zimbardo said, no, let's not do that. Let's just throw caution to the wind and look how people interact with each other, which was just like, throughout me explaining what the process of this is it happens a lot, and it's just fucked up. And it's just honestly just bad science, which, yes, the psychological trauma, horrible, right? The amount of humiliation these men had to undergo, disgusting. But do the experiment right, goddammit. Like,
Human suffering aside, just do better science, assholes.
well, because I mean, like,
Jesus.
it's, it just pissed me off. Anyway, so, like I said before, Phillip Zimbardo was a professor of psychology at Stanford University for 3 years by the time he came up with the idea of the Stanford Prison Experiment. So his goal, in his own words, was, quote, to understand the development of norms and the effects of roles, labels, and social expectations in a simulated prison environment. All right? So the Stanford Prison Experiment took place in the year of 1971 and officially kicked off when Zimbardo and his team sent out a newspaper ad that said, male college students needed for psychological study of prison life, $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks beginning August 14th. For further information and applications, come to room 248, Jordan Hall, Stanford University. So it's just...
Okay, like, hold on, really quick. $15 a day?
Yeah.
That's like nothing.
Well, you gotta remember in the 70s...
I guess it was the 70s, that's true.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess that's fair. Still, though, I'm just saying, like, even if that inflates to quite a bit more...
I want to know what it was. Hang on, I'm gonna look it
Yeah,
up.
do you wanna look up that quick little tidbit? It's 1971.
Great. Keep going. I'll chime in when I have it.
But yeah, so it was $15 a day, and originally it said 1 to 2 weeks because of the fact that dependent on how harsh the crime was, you can be released on parole. They really wanted to simulate an actual prison environment, right? But again, being said, it was cut short due to the amount of fucked up shit that actually happened. So after 70 applicants answered the local ad, they were, quote, given diagnostic interviews and personality tests to eliminate candidates with psychological problems, medical disabilities, or a history of crime and drug abuse.
Oh, fuck. $15 a day in 1971 is the same as about $95 today.
All right, I'm down with that.
Okay, I guess that's right. That's a lot.
I'm cool with it.
Well, and again, these men had no idea what they were expecting. Right. They were just playing a role, essentially playing a character, and that sentence that I just said, playing a role, playing a character, is absolutely vital to what this experiment was. And a lot of the guards used that as a backing from all the fucked up shit that they would do, was that they were just playing a role and they were just playing a character. They almost dissociated outside of themselves and saying that they looked down on themselves doing these horrendous acts to separate them further from what they were doing. But the 24 men chosen from the experiment were all white, male, middle-class, college-age students.
Go figure.
Right. And so a lot of people think it'd be interesting to see what females would do in that situation, what other forms of people would do in that situation, but it's not allowed anymore to run this type of experiment because there have been laws set up in place so that shit doesn't
Goodness, I
happen.
can't imagine why that would be.
Well, that's also the thing that I was thinking is, like, as fucked up as this experiment is, obviously it's never repeatable. Like, we can never do this again. But the information that we got from this really fucked up experiment, like, speaks volumes on human nature. So, like, I'm really unhappy that, like, it continued for as long as it did.
Right.
And, like, that it happened. But it's also one of those things where, like, this is information on human nature that's pretty unique that I don't think we would have ever been able to get unless it was, like, a case study. Mm. And this is, like, basically a case study in the way that it was set up, right?
I mean,
Not
yes.
like an experiment.
Well, because I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's so fucked up looking at the way the experiment was set up and the way the science behind it was set up is so inaccurate that it would just be, like, all the evidence would be thrown aside. But
more than that, it's not an indictment of human nature if the groups of people who were chosen aren't representative. It's representative of straight, white, young males. Mm-hmm. Like, that's
honestly,
it.
I think what's even more concerning is that they were ruled out for, like, having any mental illness issues, right? So this is representative of, like, neurotypical, like, standard white guys. But, like, I can't imagine how much worse that would have gotten, like, if you had people that had some form of mental illness, which is really common in the prison system.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I feel like it would be much worse, which is really unfortunate.
Which is 100% valid. The other thing, too, is it's really frightening for me to think that so-and-so neurotypical people can still do the absolute just fucking torture that these men committed was just horrible. And these are average dudes that were just answering an ad for a college, for the psychological experiment, and it just turned into just absolute hell. So, anyway, they were split into two groups, like I said before, 12 guards and 12 prisoners. All right, so 6 of these people, of the 12 guards and 12 prisoners, were alternates, just in case something were to happen to the prisoners or guards, which, in fact, it did. They had to call an alternate in later in the experiment, but we're going to talk about that later. And how were they picked? They were picked by a literal coin toss, determining whether they wanted to be prisoners or guards. Right?
Very scientific.
Just like the real criminal justice system.
Which you think of and it's like, oh, okay, they're trying to not have a bias of who gets picked for guard and prisoner. But
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's problems in itself in that process. But for the experiment itself, Zimbardo and his team turned the basement of the psychology department into a fake prison. So they did this all on Stanford's campus, all right? They simulated a prison by taking down the doors off laboratory rooms and replacing them with special doors that had steel bars and cell numbers on them. They then turned a small closet into the hole, which is basically solitary confinement, where quote-unquote bad prisoners would spend an extended period of time being locked in a completely dark and confined space. So what I read online on their website was that the actual hole itself was supposed to be 2 feet by 2 feet 6 inches, or 6 feet tall, just enough room for them to stand and be in.
No,
It
that's
was
not
a
even how it
literal-
is in prison.
Yeah, it was a literal, just like confined space, which is just it's abuse. But so each cell was bugged with an intercom system. And just outside the cell was a long corridor where prisoners could participate in physical activity and eat all their meals. The long corridor was known as the yard. This was also where the guards would spend most of the time monitoring the prisoners. So when you think about it, it was a literal hallway that all of this was happening. All of this was going down, right? Extremely small spaces, extremely confined spaces. The intercom system was actually really interesting because they had bugged the intercom system so they could listen to what was happening in the cells itself. But then also that they could make announcements over the intercom system, tell the prisoners what to do things of that nature.
Well, here's my concern. I think biggest point here. Nothing good happens in a basement. And I think they really just set themselves up to fail. You know what I mean?
It's just location, am I right?
The scene is so important.
And it is. It's really funny you mentioned that, because at one end of the yard was a small hole in the blocked off corridor where the researchers could monitor the progress of the experiment via a video camera. So there's actual footage that I've watched hours of this footage.
Oh boy.
Of just them going through this experiment. It's horrible. There's full documentaries and actual movies on this that I highly recommend. The movie's good. It's not quite as accurate as what really happened, because drama, you know. But
Man, you're that guy. You're like, it's not accurate to what actually happened, but it's okay. I guess.
Fine. It's whatever.
No, it's a good movie. I actually really enjoyed it. It was really representative. It's just there was a couple things that were kind of off. Believe it or not, they made Zimbardo look worse than he actually was, which, you know, was a task. So
Hollywood movie magic, am I right?
So they even went as far as blindfolding the prisoners whenever they had to use the restroom down the hall to not find a way out of the prison so they couldn't escape.
Woo!
That's
okay. That might have been a little too far.
That's excessive.
Well,
I
at this
think.
point, at least they had a bathroom to use, and it's not the shit bucket yet.
Yet? Shit bucket yet?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
It's horrific. So the cells were extremely small. There was 3 cots to cell. They had just enough room to stand up, get around, barely. Though the cells were small and the prisoners had to be monitored 24 hours a day, honestly, I think the worst part of the actual physical prison itself was the fact that there were 0 windows or clocks. Which a lot of people underestimate on how fucked up that makes you. Alright? If you don't have a sense of time, you don't have a sense of anything. So those days when you're sitting there, hours on end, doing absolutely nothing, you get little exercise a day, you have no time to actually go outside, you have no perception of time, hours can seem like days. So that's why it ended so early too, was because the amount of trauma that they had gone through seemed like so much longer to them when really it was only a span of a couple days.
That's a variable that I think they really fucked up not addressing, because that's also, you could argue, like, a lot of the reason they suffered is because of the absence of, you know, time, basically, right? Like, that has a pretty big effect on our perception of suffering.
Well,
Also, wait, how long was this whole thing?
6 days.
From start to finish? 6 days. Okay.
It was supposed to be 2 weeks.
Oof.
Oh, fuck.
So the understanding of is, like, I really, really want to stress that they've done experiments on what messing with your circadian rhythm does to you, and it will psychologically fuck you up in itself, right? That could be the experiment by itself, is just putting a person in a room with 0 windows, 0 clocks, and just letting them sit there. Because even prisoners in today's system get outside time, get windows, get some form of scheduling and timing so they know their perception of day. And that's another thing too, is it's like, that's just fucked up to be fucked up. Like, it's not even they're trying to simulate a prison anymore. They're putting them in a situation that's not even realistic.
They made one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So everything, again, consistency is everything, and Zimbardo just failed on that part as well. So when Zimbardo had set up the prison and picked the prisoners and guards, it was time for the actual experiment to take place. The prisoners were rounded up in August of 1971. The Palo Alto police showed up to the prisoners' home, and the boys were arrested. They were charged with armed robbery and burglary, were the 2 charges that they were being arrested for. Of course, though these charges were fake, that point on, they were treated like real prisoners. They were handcuffed, searched, read their rights. From this point on, these men would not be known as just college-age boys anymore. From this point, they were taken to the prison. The only thing different from a real arrest and the arrest that took place that morning were the boys were blindfolded.
Whoa.
Big yikes.
Unnecessary.
And the most shocking part of it all was that the boys were not told ahead of time what to expect or even what they would be arrested that day. The arrests were completely a surprise to the boys.
Whoa.
One of the boys was playing outside with his younger brother when he was arrested, and all of his neighbors saw the entire incident go down. They didn't know it was fake. They had no.
Oh, everybody thought it was real.
Yeah,
Shit.
and he was being blindfolded as well.
What the fuck is the purpose of that? Like, really quick, like, I don't, like, why?
That seems like just it exists just to be vindictive.
Right, and that's a lot of the problem for the experiment myself. For me, was a lot of it was just vindictive shit that they would do. The reasoning behind that, to play devil's advocate, literally, is that they did that in order to create, because it's like when prisoners get arrested, they or like when criminals get arrested, they don't know that they're going to get arrested that day or whatever, and it's like a traumatic experience. They were just trying to go through the actual arresting process. The blindfold, I don't know why they had to be blindfolded. They clearly knew where the Stanford campus was. They didn't live far from it. Some of them were students there. They could have been blindfolded on campus. It was so bad that a lot of them were in a state of shock by the time they came into the prison. And so when each prisoner entered the prison, Phillip Zimbardo greeted them himself as the warden.
All right.
This is absolutely essential to realize. So you heard me right. Phillip Zimbardo was the warden, meaning that the man running the experiment had a major role in participating in it.
Shouldn't he have been, like, absent to them?
Huge no-no. It's a huge no-no.
Yeah,
He should have been, if anything, just monitoring the videos that they had set up in the prison. There was no need / like, the validity of the experiment would be completely tossed out the window by this point by him being the warden. He should have hired somebody else. He should have done something else. The fact that he was the warden and had no actual experience being a warden shows his thirst for power in himself going into the experiment. So I personally believe that Zimbardo was a fucked up dude.
My scientific opinion.
And I've run tests on this.
But I've done so. It's like I literally,
dude.
He really is, and seeing his face and just like all the. Okay, sorry. Back to the topic.
We got her going.
It's. So after being introduced to the warden, the boys were stripped naked and deloused with a special spray, which was common practice in prisons at that point.
Right.
But
I've seen Shawshank Redemption, the movie. And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Good, I'm glad that you have first-hand experience with this, Olivia. We can reference her now. And so,
Resident expert on prisons.
Yeah, feel free to ask me any questions. I've seen, like, two prison documentaries.
Yeah, I saw Orange is the New Black, so I've got an okay understanding.
Okay, well, that's women. We're not talking about women, Brooke.
That's an aside.
Don't ask Brooke anything. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Right.
All of the movies I've seen are on men. So.
But the crucial thing through all this, too, is that they were blindfolded during this entire time that they were being stripped naked, deloused. And the guards themselves were doing this. These are boys that are their peers that immediately went to humiliation tactics.
Wow. They weren't told to do this?
So I'm about to go into what the guards were told to do and not to do. Because it is very loose on the exact rules of what the guards had not done. Because Phillip Zimbardo met up with the guards as the warden and said that he was only going to be referred to as the warden. That was his role in the experiment. And that the guards had to do whatever was necessary to have the prisoners fall into formation. With the exception of physical violence. But everything else was up to them. They got to make the rule book. They got to claim what was their thing. So that in itself was fucked up because these are college-age men with zero experience in law enforcement, right? Because in a normal prison, you're trained for this. You have you have
got a set of rules.
Right. Well, not only you have a set of rules, you have training on how to handle prisoners, how to diffuse a situation. Granted, the training isn't the best. I'm not saying it's the best, but these boys had zero training whatsoever. They were
Yeah, my cousin is a prison guard, and he had to do like entire police academy thing, right? Which is like 2 or 3 years.
Right.
So like you have to do like all the physical endurance and all the classes and like understanding the laws, and like from what I hear, it's really, really regulated, at least right now. So I have no idea what it was like in the 70s. I don't know what laws were passed and like what the training was.
Right.
But it was definitely not like rounding up some people from the street with power issues and like you get to be the boss of everyone.
Right. And remember, these are white males our age giving full power of like a playtime of, hey, you got to be a guard, do whatever you want. So yes, after being introduced to the warden, the boys were stripped naked and deloused with a special spray, this process, of course, being extremely humiliating. Prisoners were then given their uniforms, which consisted of a smock, which was basically a dress, with their prison ID number on both sides, a heavy chain worn around their right ankle, sandals, and a stocking cap made of nylon. So the dress, Zimbardo said, was to kind of humiliate them. It was to make them less of men, right?
What the fuck?
Yeah, it was
What exactly was this testing for again?
How people interacted with social behavior in a prison environment.
none of this is
You've
necessary.
mentioned so many fucking things that could greatly impact the experiment.
That's what I'm
that are
saying.
Nothing like the prison.
That's what I'm saying, because, like, you know, like, you laugh at it when you're like, oh, the experiment was so just badly done, but it's like, after being, like, told time and time again the amount of variables that can fuck up an experiment, Zimbardo is just, like, throwing caution to the wind. It's not an experiment anymore. It's just, like, his playtime that he was given to do
Yeah,
this.
it sounds like this is just, I want to create the most fucked up version of prison that I can.
Right. And he did.
Clearly.
So, these uniforms are obviously very different from the guards. The ID numbers were given to dehumanize them, depersonalize them, right?
That sounds awfully Nazi-ish.
Right. So from this point on, they were only referred to as their prison numbers.
Which also they don't do in prison.
Yeah, no, they do not. They don't. It was extremely dehumanizing. Zimbardo also made a note that the smocks they wore, the dresses, once they put them on, they stopped acting like men. That they started walking more cautiously, becoming more conscious of themselves because of the dresses. And granted, again, this is the 70s when that big stigma was around. It's not like today where it's more accepting. Obviously, it's like if you're wearing a dress and you're a guy, you're gay, you know? So it's like the whole thing behind it is it was just very, very humiliating for them and for these men to do. The other thing that was a huge thing was the nylon caps, which at first I really didn't get the point of the nylon caps. But now I understand why they were such a crucial portion of it was because they would put on the nylon caps as a resemblance to when prisoners would get shaved when first entering a prison. And it was so that their hairstyles, their haircuts wouldn't be a personalization of themselves. So that way it would take that away from them as well.
Oh. That's fucked up.
So yeah, like I said, the uniforms themselves were made to dehumanize the prisoners. The most fucked up part for me was the heavy chain and ball that they literally wore around their right ankles. There was no point to this. It was not for security. What? It was not for safety reasons. The only point was that on the website it was, quote, that they, in general, wanted to create a sense of every single time the prisoners would move, even when they were sleeping, they would feel this heaviness on them to show that, like, a representation of imprisonment. That they weren't free, that they were always there.
Again, though, this is not something, to my understanding, that they commonly do in prisons.
Right.
Yeah, like in the 30s, maybe.
No, but it's like, it's not even that. It's literally like, because in the 30s it was like, oh, like, we're having you do, like, forced labor. We need chains on you to keep you in line. It's no security, no anything. It was just for the fact to show you are a prisoner, you are here, you are nothing. It was taking away and stripping them of all their personality and making them prisoners, which is a huge fucked up tactic, was just to take away any form of personality and individualism, was just to make them their number. So Obviously, these uniforms were very different from the guards' uniforms. Going to the guards' uniforms, they had khaki-based uniforms, typical police uniforms, that came with a pair of reflective glasses, a whistle, and a billy club. And a billy club is basically just like a baton, you know? Zimbardo said this about the glasses and why they were used. Quote, "In general, we wanted to create a sense of power, that guards as a category are people who have a power over others, and in this case, power over the prisoners. This also took away any emotion. They were reflective glasses, so you couldn't look each other in the eyes." So
Do they have to wear them?
Yes, the guards wore them.
Okay.
So it took away, again, any form of humanity from the prisoners to guards. So you were already setting yourself up to make the guards at this high place and the prisoners at a low place.
Right.
So again, giving them power.
Man.
So to simulate a prison-like environment, you would think the guards would need some form of training, right? None. Zero. Absolute 100% fucking zero form of training. They were told to do whatever was necessary. And I know we touched upon this, but like a little bit, but the forms of training that men have to go through today, years and years, what Olivia was saying previously, years of training. I think they've also incorporated since the 70s of this experiment of like actual like psych training of how to handle like from a trauma standpoint of prisoners, which obviously these men had zero experience for. So even though there were 24 guards and prisoners altogether, only 18 were in the prison at a time. They managed to take shifts, the prisoners, where they would do 9-hour shifts at a time, and then they would rotate different sets of guards. The actual prisoners themselves had favorite guards and not favorite guards. Obviously, none of their guards were to their liking, but there were some guards who were worse than others. 3 guards worked each of the 8-hour shifts, while 3 prisoners occupied each of the 3 barren cells around the clock. Now, the guards got shifts. The prisoners had to be there 24 hours a day, all day. Zimbardo really tried to touch on how the guards themselves went through a lot of psychological trauma through this, which I think after the guilt itself was a lot of trauma for them, and I'm not denying that. But obviously, the prisoners went through so much more shit than the guards had to go through.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
But, again, the guards were the ones that they were truly studying, because the guards' lewd acts were truly humiliating. So, at 2:30 a.m., the prisoners were awakened by sleeping with blasting whistles for first many counts. Counts serve the purpose of familiarizing the prisons with the numbers, with their numbers. But most importantly, these events provided a regular occasion for the guards to exercise control over the prisoners. So they would wake them up in the middle of the night to go over their numbers, would make them repeat their numbers over and over again. If anybody got them wrong, they would make them repeat them again. If anybody was off or wasn't fast enough for the guards, they would make them repeat them again. If everything was perfect, they'd make them repeat them again. And this was just to roughly just throw them off.
And this was a requirement, or they just did this themselves?
This is where it gets fucked up, because no one told the guards to do this.
What?
No one told the guards to do this. This is something.
So you're telling me that a bunch of college-age students got up at 2:30 in the morning on their own?
No. The guards summoned them with loud whistles.
No. That's what I'm saying. So no one told the guards to do that, right?
No.
So a bunch of college-age students got up on their own at 2:30 in the morning with the only goal being, I'm gonna fuck with these dudes even though I don't have to.
Yeah.
And how many days into the experiment is this?
This is day 1.
Ah, cool. Cool. Just wanted to double check.
Holy shit.
But it was mainly not to just recognize their own prison numbers, but it was just to assess authority. Like, we're the big dogs on campus. We're the men that are doing this to you.
So they didn't even have a gauge for whether or not they were going to cooperate. That was just something they planned on doing.
Yeah. A lot of the times they would joke and laugh about all the things that would happen during their shifts and the amount of trauma that they would go through. And it's just, they didn't fully understand the impact that it would have on these men. So at first the prisoners were not completely into the rules. They thought it was funny. They reacted in like a joking manner of like, oh yeah, like this is something that these guys are putting us through, you know, like that they're that they're playing their role, they're doing their part, but the guards took it so seriously that whenever any of the prisoners would make jokes or try to be lighthearted and gain some form of human contact with the guards, they would furiously yell, make them do push-ups, make them do physical activity, and punish them through this. So quickly, the prisoners learned that this wasn't as fun as it was set out to be.
Yikes.
Good lord.
And again, since this was the beginning of this, the experiment, they weren't too sure how to assess authority over these prisoners, right? So they were just doing shit that seemed cruel to them. Again, from this, a lot of confrontations arose from the guards and prisoners.
Yeah.
Some of the things that were really common that the guards would make the prisoners do were push-ups. Push-ups were a huge form of physical punishment. So it's just whenever they would act out, start joking, not do something exactly perfect, the guards would make them do 50 push-ups at a time.
Shit. I can't do 50 push-ups.
I can't do 5. I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, like, and those are like 5 like girl push-ups. Like, I don't think I could do like a boy push-up. Know what I mean? Like,
and this is
just the strength is not there.
Right, but like also, so yeah, I mean, and this is an exact quote from the website. You ready? It's a rather juvenile and minimal form of punishment. However, we later learned that push-ups were often used as a form of punishment in Nazi concentration camps.
Whoops. Can you imagine finding that out, like being that researcher? Like, you're like halfway through the experiment and like you're talking to your spouse about this and they're like, actually, I'm pretty sure like that was something that they did in like Nazi prison camps. It's really dehumanizing and like, as a physically extraneous task, and you're just like sitting there and you're like shuffling your peas around and you're like, okay,
I didn't know that.
I'm gonna have to bring this up with the guys tomorrow because this is really disheartening. Disheartening news.
But to set this up, relating a little bit back to your topic, Olivia, and I don't know if we even publish this podcast or it will be relevant, but in communist China, the idea of groupthink, remember how you were talking about how everyone has to step each other up, right?
Yeah.
That if you weren't, that you would do one communist act and then that person would see you do that communist act and had to do an even more communist act, and it just became the cycle of who was the best communist, right?
Sure.
So, same thing with the guards. Who was the most ballsy man and who could inflict the most damage, the most trauma, the most form of be the best guard, essentially. So not only push-ups were enforced, but something that was noteworthy was the guards would step on the prisoner's back while they were doing push-ups. Or
one of the only rules that they had was not to physically abuse the prisoners.
Right. So they would step on the prisoner's back, adding more weight to the push-ups, or they would have other prisoners sit on their backs, or step on the backs of fellow prisoners during their push-ups. Which again is another extremely psychologically traumatic thing, because it's other prisoners turning on other prisoners and forcing them to be participants in the actual abuse. Which we will continue to see. So, essentially, the first day passed without incident. Okay?
Well, I'd say without incident is a little generous.
That's a stretch.
Well, because this is the stuff where it's like, this was pretty, obviously they didn't expect this, but this was pretty normal, was instituting some form of physical exercise as a form of punishment, talking down to the prisoners. They expected some of that. What they didn't expect was on the second morning, some of the prisoners issued a rebellion.
Oh boy. Day 2!
Woo.
Day 2 out of what was supposed to be day 14. So the prisoners removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells by putting their beds against the door.
Oh my god. That's incredible.
So
wow, what I would not have given to be able to incite that kind of rebellion in high school. Like, I'm just saying, like, that would have been very effective.
What a hero. Oh
if
my
anything,
god.
this is an experiment on support systems, supporting each other and grouping together for the common good.
True friendships.
It's funny that you're saying talking about a support system, because basically, since this happened during the morning shift guards were shocked and angry at the night shift guards because surely the night shift guards were too lenient on the prisoners for them to act out in such a rebellion.
I thought you were going to be like, because surely, like, they had to have done something wrong to get them to act like this, but that is not where you went at all.
That's not where we went.
So,
oh boy.
Again, the guards didn't know how to handle the situation since they were 20-year-old men with zero police training. At first, they
punch them in the face.
At first, they insisted that reinforcements get called in. The guards were willing to stand by. Who were at call home shifts. So basically, they had guards who could be called in case something were to go wrong at the prison, which was again a common practice at normal prisons. But guards weren't too happy about being called in on the time off.
Same big mood.
So naturally, let's fight fire with fire. They got a fire extinguisher.
Oh!
Which they continued to shoot a stream of skin-chilling carbon dioxide, force the prisoners away from the door, and push them away from their cells. And again, all of this video and audio is online. The actual footage of them breaking down the doors and turning against each other, it's quite frightening. And again, day 2.
Yeah, that's day 2.
Wow, we are going really slow through these days too, so I'm just like waiting for it to
get worse, right?
Right, because we're a third of the way done realistically through the experiment, right? But they didn't know that.
Because something happened to end it early, and this wasn't it.
No, oh my god, So the guards broke into each cell, completely stripped the prisoners down, took the beds out, and forced the leaders of the actual rebellion into solitary confinement.
Wait, hold on. Wasn't there just like one door?
Yeah.
So you're telling me they took 3 grown men and put them in one confined 2x2 space?
Stripped naked.
Well, that's pretty gay.
Oh my fucking god!
I'm sorry. I make jokes when I'm nervous, and this is really stressful for me.
Can you imagine being the one gay guy there and being like, oh no.
Brie, what the fuck?
What are we gonna
I'm
do?
Just saying, it's the 70s. It's pretty tough to be open and gay, and like, I'm just saying, you gotta take what you can get.
I am recusing myself of this entire conversation.
All right, back to...
Yeah, let's just go back to the 3 naked dudes in a 2x2 space. Let's go back to that.
Okay, so we're gonna go to so then obviously guards didn't react nicely to this. They started yelling, cussing at the prisoners, reinforcing their means of control. The rebellion was crushed shortly, but now a new problem was facing the guards. That 3 guards couldn't handle 9 prisoners at a time. The prison budget was too low. So one of the guards,
morons. Amateur night.
Right. So one of the guards came up with a solution. Let's use psychological tactics instead of physical ones.
Oh no!
Like what, Brie?
Oh
no!
Psychological tactics
That's not
amounted
good.
to setting up a privilege cell. One of 3 cells was designated as a privilege cell. The 3 prisoners listed involved in the rebellion were given special privileges. They got their uniforms back, their beds back, and were allowed to wash and brush their teeth. These were the privileges they were given, which are basic human rights. The others were not. Privileged prisoners also got to eat special food in the prisons, who also got to eat in front of the other prisoners. So that prisoners were encouraged to be part of the privileged pew.
Oh
So,
boy.
Also, who can't I in my 21 years on this earth would have never independently come up with that on my own.
Never.
Like, you know what I mean? I'd be like, fuck, I mean, I can't handle this. I can't handle this situation. I'd be kind of like at a loss, and then suddenly, like in my 20-year-old mind, I'm like, oh no. Okay, I got it. We're gonna feed some of them and make them watch.
Right.
That's my plan.
Right.
What
That
the fuck?
it wouldn't have never occurred to me.
Right, but then, so that's the whole thing, too, is going through, especially reading the Lucifer Effect, not necessarily on just the Stanford Prison Experiment, because that itself is fucked up. I really, really encourage you to read that book. But it's, you never know what you're capable of in that setting. And that's what the guards kept saying over and over and over again.
No, that's completely fair. That is, like, one of those things where, like, you know, you read about these terrible things. Like, that was my point in communist China. So it's unfair of me to, like, make that comparison, because it's like, oh my God, in my years of life, I would never beat a man to death, like, attached to a radiator. But, like, I have no idea what I do.
But if you have enough people who you grow up with and who are telling you to beat this man to death, you're going to beat the man to death.
Yeah,
because we are social animals. We form in packs. And granted, how much I would like to think I could never take another human being's life, right?
No,
I'm sure you could. I'm sure I could.
But at the same point,
well, not me.
I could.
Yeah, not Olivia. Olivia's a fucking pussy,
and that,
right?
And that is the thing. Like, as who I am right now, currently, I can't imagine thinking of that punishment.
Yeah.
So, like, that is almost horrifying to me. Like, what kind of state would I have to be in?
Right.
To think of that.
Right.
Because I can't imagine doing it right now.
It's just that, like, that's all fair, but they were thinking of psychological torture methods before day one even started.
Right.
So, like, I don't know, man. I'm thinking maybe these are just some fucked up people.
Right.
Well, here's the thing, too, that I find really interesting. I don't know if you guys ever saw that video about the blue-eyed and brown-eyed kids. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, for sure.
So, like, that was one of those things where, like, that's a really small scale, and I feel like a much fairer example of, like, group mentality. But, like, basically, like, in a gist, it was a school teacher who, like, she did this every single year when she was an elementary school teacher. She would come in, and she'd say, okay, today, we're going to give you privileges. So if you have blue eyes today, then you're better than brown-eyed people. And she would, you know, throw off a ton of different, like, assumption of brown-eyed people, that they're not as smart, that their parents beat them, like this, that, and the other.
Right.
Well, she said, like one guy said, like, my dad, like, hits me. And she's like, oh, well, his dad doesn't hit him, and he's a blue-eyed person. Like, you know, maybe that's just something blue-eyed people don't do. And she'd give collars to the kids that were not in charge that day. And it was only a 2-day thing, right? She wouldn't fuck with kids for that long. But, like, on the second day, she'd switch it. And so, like, on the first day, if blue-eyed people were the people that were good and they're better than brown-eyed people, they treated all of the brown-eyed people like shit. They would not let them play on the playground. They'd make fun of them and tease them. And then, yeah, okay, the dog's fine. And then on the other day, she would switch it. So then brown-eyed people got to be in charge, and they treated the blue-eyed people exactly the same. And that's, like, one day, right? And that's children. Like, that's little fucking kids.
Well, you know, it's actually funny because I looked at this experiment while researching this. I looked at another experiment that I'm actually going to kind of take a break from the Stanford Prison Experiment and talk to you guys about, which I'm sure you all knew about. But during the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment, they actually, so the first day was blue eyes, right? Blue eyes were the favored ones. And then she would quote people in history that had blue eyes that were, like, scientists. I think Albert Einstein was one of them, or, like, people that just made, like, great advancements. And then she would quote horrible people who had, like, brown eyes and would be like, look, this comparison, and would use fallacies and logic to make children think that they were naturally bad. But the thing that I found was super interesting to me was that blue-eyed children were horrible and cruel to brown-eyed children, wouldn't let them play together at recess, all that different stuff. But the next day, the brown-eyed children were much harsher to the blue-eyed children than the blue-eyed children were originally the brown-eyed children the first day.
Because like, they finally got to, like, take back the power. And I think it was the third day she was like, okay, first of all, neither of you are better than the other person. Like, did you feel bad when you got treated that way? And everybody was like, yeah, I didn't like being treated that way. And she said, so why should you ever treat someone differently just because they have different skin color?
Right.
Because I think this was the 50s.
No,
right?
it was the 60s. It was during the
60s.
It was during the Civil Rights Movement. And she was a white woman that was really passionate about it. God, I love her. Oh, she's so good. You actually
But see, that's such a good example of, like, she's not even giving them a lot of power. She's just saying you're better than them.
Well, see, and this is, like, an example of an
children.
actual true experiment, because she gave them afterwards, gave them a overcap of what happened during the experiment, what was being tested. They were debriefed, which is something that's huge as a psychological experiment.
Yeah.
There's 3 main rules in psychological experiments that were actually set up by the Stanford Prison Experiment. Afterwards, an organization was set up to put these rules in place because the Stanford Prison Experiment was so detrimental. They felt they needed their own group.
You've got a new set of rules just because you fucked up that bad.
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened. And so one of the main sets of rules is to debrief everyone partaking in this experiment, right? Because if you don't debrief them, it could have traumatic effects on them throughout their life.
Sure.
So one of the experiments that I want to talk about that I briefly looked up, talking about groupthink, and not only groupthink, but following a leader and following the power of, if somebody says something, you do it. And following that is the Milgram experiment, which... Which, do you know about this, Brooke?
I don't.
Okay, so I'm going to give a brief summary of the Milgram experiment. So basically, the Milgram experiment, the purpose of the experiment was to show how people conform to authority, much like the Stanford Prison Experiment. Actually, Zimbardo took a lot from the Milgram experiment, and that was some of his, inspiration for the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Pinterest board.
Yeah, you
Inspirations.
You're like, Vietnam is up here.
Jesus.
So his goal was to show how people like Nazi soldiers could participate in such horrendous acts as torturing and killing Jews in concentration camps based off the sole justification that a superior officer had told them to do so. Because during this time where Milgram was running these experiments, the trials condemning Nazi soldiers were going on. And when, for acts of war, right, acts of injustice during war, when these Nazis were being tried, all these Nazis could say was, my superior officer told me to do this. And so lawyers would ask them, so you're telling me you shot down 50 Jews at a time, tortured them, were okay with doing this, saw them starving every day, and you did it solely because someone told you to. And the only thing Nazis could say was, yeah. And, that's awful, and that's horrible, but Milgram wanted to show that anyone is susceptible to this, that if a whole group of people could be, that even Americans could as well. So, the experiment went down like this. 2 participants were told they were taking part in a scientific experiment testing memory. One of the participants would act as a learner, and the other as a teacher. The teacher and learner would be separated by a single screen. The teacher would conduct a memory game with a list of words. After reading the list, the learner would have to recall the correct word that matched with words the teacher would read back to them. So, an example would be like ball, and then a list of words after that would be blue, red, orange, and yellow. And then they would say blue ball, and then they would have to remember that ball and blue were associated with each other, not yellow and ball and whatever. And there was a whole list of words they had to go through. So at this point, unless you were superhuman with a photogenic memory, you had, to fail at some point throughout this experiment. So when you would fail, the teacher, the person teaching the behaviors, would administer an electric shock to the learner. Each shock would go in intervals, depending on how they progressed in each thing that they got wrong. So if you got 1 wrong, it was a light shock. If you got 2 wrong, it was a slightly larger shock. To the point where it was up to, I believe, 300 volts of electricity.
Oh, shit.
Which is a lot.
That is a lot.
No, it's lethal. It's lethal.
Yeah.
So the strength of the shocks would go up. The catch, though, was that the learner was actually part of the experiment and would not gain any actual shocks whatsoever. The real experiment...
because that's a really good thing to do because, you don't want to do something really fucked up.
Well, and not even that. So basically, the real experiment was not a memory game, but was to see how far the teacher would go with the shocks, right? So the actual learner himself was an actor. So when they would when they would hook him up to the machine, the teacher would see them hooked up to the machine. And then there was also a man in a lab coat, and he was the instructor. And the man in the lab coat would show how much shock the man was receiving, and would actually show the learner and the teacher how much shock it was. And the teacher would feel the shock and say, ow, that, hurt. In some of the experiments, the learner would go as far as saying, hey, I have a heart problem. Is this going to affect my heart problem? In front of the teacher. And the experimenter who was running it would say, no, it's fine. Everything should be fine. You can let us know if you have any pain. Right? So, here, let me find where I was. The real experiment was to see how far the teacher would go with the shocks. Throughout the experiment, the learner's screams, which were really just a series of audio recordings of screams of pain and scripted phrases, it was important these phrases were scripted, would gradually get worse as the shocks got worse. So, like, at first it was grunts, uncomfortableness, some irritability, but then eventually it would be, ow, this really hurts. This is actually hurting me. Hey, I have a heart condition. Someone needs to let me out of here. I need to go now. This is going to kill me. Please, please, please stop. And eventually it was silence.
Whoa.
Implying death. Or something else.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah. So while they were administering the shocks, some of the teachers would groan while others dug their fingernails into their own skin. Extremely, extremely uncomfortable. There were some teachers who would actually break out in laughing fits because they had no idea on what to do. The common theme, though, was that whenever the first signs of pain were felt or, like, were heard, the teacher would look back at the person running the experiment to see if what they were doing were okay. And when the person running the experiment would have no reaction, they would continue to do it. Of course, some of them protested when the screams got worse and worse by saying, hey, I'm not administering pain to this person anymore. And then the person who ran the experiment would say things such as, please continue, the experiment must finish, we need your cooperation, please continue. And eventually there was 3 or 4 phrases that they would say, and if they continued to reject past that point, they would let them go and be okay to stop the experiment. And then they would debrief them on what was really going on.
Yeah.
So,
but didn't, like, most of them bring it to lethal?
So how many of them do you think brought it to lethal?
How many were there? Like, total?
Out of I think there was like 200. I know the exact percentage of how many people did
well,
it.
let's just say roughly
percentage.
200. I'm going to say like 80%.
80%? You think brought it to lethal? 80%?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with a little bit lower because I have some hope for humanity. I'm gonna say 65.
So
Rookie numbers.
So
I
Brooke,
know.
65% of the teachers administered the ultimate shock of 450 volts.
Holy
that was
fuck!
fatal.
I'm so awesome.
It was that was really
wow.
shockingly on point. But 100% administered shocks of at least 300 volts.
Rookie numbers, huh, Olivia?
Hey, did you not listen to her last quote? 100% put 300 volts.
That's still crazy.
Which is lethal, right?
All because
I mean,
a man...
it could be.
Well, it was enough to severely hurt them. But this was all done because a man in a white lab coat told them to do so.
Told them
65% of people were willing to kill a man just because someone else in a white lab coat said so. And these were American citizens.
Right.
They could have...
Which is also, that's one of those things that's really fucked up because, like, Zimbardo set the precedent, right? Like, if they just, like, initiated the experiment and said, like, you know, you're going to be playing as prison guards, like, they didn't make any indication that, like, being in control was the main thing, right? Then maybe this wouldn't have happened the way that it did, but he set it up saying your primary goal is to maintain control and order.
Right. And
which is going to make them act a certain way.
Right. It was very specific, the words in the script that Zimbardo used during that time. Right. So that to me is saying that, hey, Zimbardo's not a great guy, right?
Yeah.
So all because a man in a white lab coat told them to do so, they carried out lethal amounts of shock throughout this experiment. Milgram summarized these experiments beautifully with this quote, right? Moreover, even when the destructive effects of the work become patently clear, and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resource needed to resist authority.
Oof.
One of those people who resisted authority completely, after a certain amount of shocks, was a man who was an electrician, because he knew exactly how the amount of shocks would affect the people doing it. Which shows that ignorance is a negative and awful thing, right? So, let's move on.
Man.
So,
what day are we on? Are we on day 3?
Day 2.
Yeah, I think so. Oh,
Day
still?
2.
We're still
Okay.
on day
Still
2.
on day 2. Okay.
How would you guys have reacted to the special treatment privileges, do you think?
As a guard or as a prisoner?
As a prisoner, do you think you would have said, "Hey, man, I'm going to do what's best for me, or I'm going to do best for the prisoners," and either revolt or continue to go against what the guards are saying, or play kiss ass?
Honestly, I'm going to be honest with myself. I'd probably play kiss ass because my survival instincts would start kicking in.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
So after half a day of the actual good prisoner system, some of the bad prisoners were put into the good cell, thoroughly confusing all the other prisoners. Some of the prisoners who were the ringleaders were now thought that the prisoners from the privileged cell must be informers, and suddenly the prisoners became distrustful of each other.
Oh, no.
Oh, big yikes.
Do you know how fucked up that is? The guards
This is
said
awful.
to themselves, let's fuck with their minds so they would even trust each other further by making some of the ringleaders come into the privileged cells, acting as if they did something right, when in all reality they didn't actually turn on each other.
Holy shit.
So they did this to break their alliances, right? And,
Wow.
so an ex-convict actually informed the people behind this study that an actual similar tactic was used with real guards in real systems to break prisoner alliances.
Oh my god.
And again, these people
but
had
of
no training.
course.
So this is just psychological abuse that they came up with themselves.
They just came up with organically.
Right.
Wow.
And so they do this, again, by breaking up races in prisons today. A lot of the times you'll see blacks sitting with blacks, whites sitting with whites, so on and so forth, right? Because that's your group.
Well, yeah, what that does is it makes, a race more of an issue, and the enemy is somebody who doesn't look like me, when really the enemy is going to be the guards that are mistreating them.
Right.
But
yeah.
Exactly. Almost took the words straight out of my mouth, was that it's deflecting it from the guards onto the prisoners themselves.
Right.
And again, looking at some of these pictures is just absolutely awful. If you guys want to look on your computer on some of the actual scenes from the Stanford Prison Experiment, it's horrifying. Actually, also, so by doing this tactic, it created a unity among the guards themselves. By playing this cruel game, it made them all conform into actually believing that the prisoners were troublemakers and that they were doing something wrong. When in all reality, all of their charges were fake. These were just normal men like themselves who were determined by a flip of the coin. They could have been in their place easily, just as the prisoners could have been versus in the guards.
Man.
So every single behavior that the prisoners displayed was under control of the guards from this point on. Going to the toilet became a privilege that the guard could grant or deny. Alright?
Jesus.
So lockup was at 10 p.m. every night. Prisoners were often forced to urinate or defecate in a bucket that was left
There's
in the
the
cell.
shit bucket.
Moving on back to that foreshadowing from previously.
Yeah.
There's the shit bucket. But it was kept in the cell, and we gotta remember that these cells were packed. It was 3 cots in one cell, which was a basic laboratory room in the Stanford Hall in the university. So, and again, this is happening at a university.
Was the dean of the school aware that this was going on?
Well, they didn't know exactly what was happening during the experiments, but they they knew that he was doing a prison experiment in the halls of the psychology department. Guards would also deny on occasion for the prisoners to empty their buckets, and so their actual rooms started to smell of piss and feces.
Great.
So, again, guards were especially tough on the ringleader of the rebellion. Prisoner number 5401. I love this kid. I really do. I think that, he goes against everything that was groupthink in this experiment. Just because he was the one who was like, no, this is bullshit. This isn't an experiment anymore. This is a real prison, and we need to get the fuck out of here. Because at this point, this sounds like a fucking horror movie. There seems to be no standards. So...
Were they at any point able to, opt out?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what they were told.
But they weren't, actually.
So we're gonna dive into that a little later on of what... So they were told at the beginning of the experiment that at any point they're free to leave. Now, the thing that's the most interesting that kept them there was not necessarily the people running the experiment, even though the people running the experiment coerced the prisoners to stay, and pushed past their limits, honestly, a lot of the time. A lot of what they did was fucked up. They should have immediately let them leave once they should have had a safe word established. I know that's kind of kinky, but they should have, they should have had something established where it was like, no, this is the end, this is done. Right?
Yeah.
But they didn't.
Blender, I'm out, blender.
Java.
Shit.
But the guards were especially tough on the ringleader, who was a heavy smoker. So they would deny him privileges.
As they should be.
Well, I mean, this is the 70s. They would deny him privileges to smoke or give him opportunity to smoke and bait him with cigarettes.
What the fuck? Let's just exploit addiction, I guess.
Right. So, later, while looking over the prisoner's mail, they learned that the prisoner was a self-styled radical activist. He had volunteered in order to expose our study, which he mistakenly thought was an establishment tool to find ways to control student radicals. In fact, he had planned to sell the story to an underground newspaper when the experiment was over. However, even when he fell so completely into the role of prisoner that he was proud to be elected leader of the Stanford County Jail Grievance Committee, as revealed in a letter to his girlfriend.
They were allowed to communicate with people?
Yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
After being censored, their letters would be read by the guards.
Man.
As well as being read by the warden, Phillip Zimbardo.
Wow, so letters for help would not be sent?
No. Surprisingly, no.
All right.
So, well, because, and you gotta know, the most radical of them all, Prisoner 5401, would write and say, I'm gonna expose this shit. So he was in it for the long haul, right?
Right.
But most prisoners actually believed that the guards were chosen above them because they showed guard-like aspects. But in all reality, again, it was the flip of a coin,
Random.
right? So they believed that the guards themselves were actually higher above these people. Now, reading the letters, some of the prisoners, again, day fucking 2, signed their letters with their prison number.
Holy shit!
Wow.
What the fuck?
Which is, let's just say, frightening.
That's... the...
Yeah. Also, another important thing is that when the prisoners did get to talk to Zimbardo as a warden, because they would request time to speak to the warden, and Zimbardo would graciously grant that to them.
Thank God.
He would wear the same glasses that the guards would wear, the reflective glasses, so there was no emotional...
Seems like it shouldn't be the way it is. Wow.
Right, you would fucking think. Alright, so, less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner number 8612 began suffering from acute emotional disturbance, disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying and rage. In spite of all this, we had already come to think so much like prison authorities that we thought he was trying to con us to fool us into releasing him. Was the exact quote.
From who? Who said that?
Zimbardo.
Holy fuck!
Oh my god.
To fool us into releasing him. That shouldn't be a fool thing. If you want to be released from an experiment, you should be released at any point, because these men did not commit a fucking crime. So when, during the interview of when they were interviewing prisoner 8612 after he had his break, the consultant, basically chastised him for being weak, told him that he was, that his abuse was expected in normal prisons because...
Wait, Zimbardo told him
No,
this.
one of his consultants. He also hired people who were past felons or had been convicted of crimes that would experience jail and prison life, which was smart of him to do because people with real experience. That's good in an experiment. But also, yeah, he was like, this is normal. You're being a bitch. Was basically his reaction to his acute psychological trauma.
Oh my god.
It's that if he were in San Quentin prison, like the consultant was, he'd become an he would just be or sorry, I read this wrong. If he was in San Quentin prison, sorry. Was given the offer of becoming an informant in exchange for no further good harassment. Oh, okay, so basically they offered him a role of becoming an informant in order for the guards not to harass him anymore. Was their solution instead of letting him go. Was the rule or the promise. So during the next count, prisoner number 8612 told the other prisoners that you can't quit. They won't let you leave.
What the fuck?
Because
I know it said that like 6 times in the last 5 minutes, but like this is psychological and physical torture. And
well,
now they've infringed upon the agreement that they entered into at the beginning.
Right,
like,
absolutely. So you gotta be in the mindset of the prisoners though at this time, right? You just saw one of your inmates who, hour 32, had a fucking psychological breakdown. The actual audio, I was gonna send it to you, Olivia, but it's maybe we can edit it in later at this point.
I'm so fucked up inside. I feel really fucked up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. Don't you know? I can't say that. I'm fucked up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all fucked up inside. Help me out! Help me out now!
Hour 32. So you see this happening, and you're like, fuck, I don't want to pardon that shit. The warden comes down, grabs the man, they go upstairs to have a talk. He comes back down and says, they won't let me leave. At this point, the prisoners are on edge, to say the least.
why ever would that be?
Jesus Christ.
God. So they said that the prisoners started to act crazy, to scream, to curse, to get into a rage that seemed out of control. It took quite a while before we became convinced that he was really suffering and that we had to release him, was what Zimbardo said. Which, what the fuck? So now we're on day 3. And this is visiting day.
Visiting day.
God, we're only halfway
This will be
through.
a nice story, right? This is a good one. This is going to be all pleasant and positive, right?
This is gonna be a good one.
This is a good one.
So, the next day, parents and friends were allowed to visit the prisoners, right? Mm-hmm. So Zimbardo had a couple concerns, that if the parents saw how the jail was,
calls the fucking police?
they might take their sons home and end the experiments early. Which, if in your mind you're already thinking that, you should stop the experiment.
Yeah, there's probably something fucking wrong.
Right.
Dickbag.
So, to stop this, Zimbardo made all the visitors comfortable by having the prisoners clean themselves, get washed, shaved, groomed, had them just, like, basically polish up the prison. Fed them a big dinner, played music.
So you mean like the staged photos in Nazi concentration camps? You mean like that?
Yeah.
Brooke, you're the one that said Nazi. Brie didn't say Nazi.
I didn't say
Who brought
Nazi.
Nazis into this?
Who said anything about Nazis?
Oh my God.
So they even went as far as having a Stanford cheerleader greet the guests at the front of the prison.
So they just had like a cheerleader on like retainer or something like that?
I mean, I guess they hired her out.
Right.
All right.
Oh, God. So when all of the visitors came, they seemed to be normal, right? They had a good humor. They had no reason to believe or even think of the distress that their sons had to go through during this in time. They thought that it was a fun, situational thing that their sons were getting paid good money for that was part of their college, right? Nothing could go wrong. So they were told to wait half an hour, that only 2 visitors could see any one prisoner at a time. They were limited to 10 minutes of visiting time and had to be under surveillance of the guards during the entire event. Which, again, prompted the prisoners not to fully say what was going on.
Also, can you imagine how fucked up that is? Like, you've just experienced some of, like, the worst 36 hours of your entire life.
Yeah.
And, like, then they're, like, magically change it. And you have this small hope, like, oh, wow, that was weird. Maybe they're rectifying it. And I get to see my family and things are good again. And then have it, like, immediately taken away from you.
Switching a dime. Yeah, for sure.
So before they could enter, parents had to basically had to discuss their son's case with the warden. They had to talk to Zimbardo himself. Parents complained about these rules, but remarkably, they followed along suit. They agreed to do what the guards asked them to, and again, follow orders. So again, they too became part of the experiment. So some of the parents got a little upset over how tired and distressed their sons seemed to be. But the reaction was basically that they would work within a system to make the conditions better for their boys. That the superintendent would say, you know, your son has been doing a good job here. We'll take care of him. Wink, wink. When one mother told that she had never seen her son told the guards that she had never seen her son looking that bad, Zimbardo responded by shifting the blame from the situation to her son. What's the matter with your boy? Doesn't he sleep well? Then I asked the father, don't you think your boy can handle this? The father responded with, of course he can.
Psychological manipulation.
Oh, it sounds like it. From a professor of psychology.
What the fuck? This is way worse than I remember it being when they taught it in Intro to Psych.
And that's my thing too, was studying this, it kept me bursting from telling you all the fucked up shit that had just been inside my mind.
Well, the reason why it probably wasn't built up in, like, Intro to Psych or whatever is that this is a generally pretty respected study. Like,
oh my god.
Like, this is something that they teach and use as a basis for human nature, even though it was so deeply flawed. Like, I mean,
that's also, too, they're, like, I remember my teacher was like, yeah, and, like, you know, they started treating themselves really poorly, and they ended it in 6 days, and it was supposed to last 2 weeks. Anyway, moving on, and you're like, hold on, wait, whoa.
What happened?
How do you not know that we shouldn't be teaching this as an example of human nature?
Right.
Okay, keep going, buddy.
The father's response was, of course he can. He's a real tough kid, a leader. Turning to the mother, the father said, come on, honey, we've wasted enough time already. And to me, he said, see you again the next visiting time. So, next major event that had happened was there was a rumor of a mass escape. One of the guards overheard... You're fine. One of the guards overheard the prisoners talking about an escape. That would take place right after visiting hours, which honestly is smart for the prisoners to do, because then...
What a fucking horror show.
Yeah. Prisoner 8612, who was released the night before, was going to round up a bunch of his friends and break in to free the prisoners, right? So this is the one who had the mental break. Their thought was that he was going to come back and rescue the prisoners. So, Zimbardo's reaction to the rumor... What do you think his reaction was? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay, I think that he's gonna, like, you know, in a really calm and collected way, understand that that's a really irrational rumor, and, like, at the end of the day, what's important is the data, and if they elect to leave, then, you know, he's gonna have to respect that as, like, a responsible researcher.
So his plan was he got all of his team to talk about and plan how to foil the escape and keep the security of the prison intact.
What the fuck?
Wait. He advised the guards himself?
Yeah, because he had a team of researchers with him. Which is also frightening, which means that a team of researchers sat and saw this just like Zimbardo did and said nothing.
There wasn't, like, any stories of, like, anybody being like, hey, Chief, maybe I'm the only guy here, and you know what? I just want to say...
Well, so J6 is...
Here, but,
hey guys,
about this.
I know I just grabbed the coffee and I'm an intern, but holy fucking shit. There's a shit bucket in the corner. This dude's fucking cussing the camera out. I don't know what's going on, man.
There's a shit bucket in the corner.
One thing I forgot to mention, which was crucial, was prisoner 8612, who had been released the night before. Zimbardo had a moment of clarity with him when he was being interviewed.
Oh, no.
The moment of clarity was this. that when he was being interviewed talking about why he should be released, he was begging Zimbardo to go. And then the guards downstairs basically came up with a brilliant idea of psychological torment to get the prisoners to shout, "Prisoner number 8612 is a bad prisoner," over and over again. Now,
Oh my god.
as a normal person, you're like, fuck it. I don't care if I'm a bad prisoner, because I'm not one, right? I am part of a psychological experiment. This was all an act. I get to leave now, because I am in a state where I need to see a doctor. What was 8612's response was, you know what? I can stay. I don't want to be seen as a bad prisoner. To which Zimbardo said, no, son, you can leave. To which the prisoner said, no, I want to stay. I don't want to do anything wrong. He started putting his chains on and going back downstairs.
Mood?
Oh no.
And Zimbardo, like, had a moment of fucking clarity and was like, no, you're leaving. This is an experiment. You are not a prisoner. You did nothing wrong. You are a member of society. This is your name. You will go home. To which the prisoner decided, yeah, it was time for me to go home.
Actually, you know what? Sure.
He hears his name and it's like Operation Paperclip and he just snaps back to reality.
Right.
Can you imagine though? Can you imagine he's like, man, I did good today. Maybe this is going too far, but at the end of the day, I sent a good man home. And he claps his hands and he's like, now we gotta figure out how to quell this prison escape.
Right, he patted himself on the back for that. He thought it was great.
What a narcissist.
Yeah, right, so you can see why I don't like Zimbardo.
Fair.
So after Zimbardo and his constituents meeting, they decided to place an experimental Confederate, right, which is basically just somebody who's taking part as an actor in the experiment, as part of the experiment, in the cell that 8612 had occupied previously, right? So the job of the informant was to give them information about the actual escape itself. So they planted a bug. So when they went back to the Palo Alto Police Department and asked that if there was a sergeant who would could have the prisoners transferred to their old jail, the police department eventually turned them down because they weren't covered by insurance if they moved their prisoners into their jail.
All right. That's the only reason?
Mm-hmm. His quote was, "I left angry and disgusted at the lack of cooperation between our correctional facilities."
And his response was to DIY it, and for that I commend him.
Like,
Nothing
again,
like a little
I
bit
feel like
of
Zimbardo was a
initiative, am I
Pinterest man,
right?
you know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah, he was just like, you know what, guys? We can do this. I think we have the resources. We just get some mason jars,
Some
maybe
super
some
glue.
burlap sacks. I have a glue gun at home. I'm going to have to ask my wife if I could borrow it. But I think we have the workings of a prison.
We can make it happen.
So no. Essentially what he did instead was he formulated a second plan. This plan was to dismantle the jail completely after the visitors left, call in more guards and chain the prisoners together, put bags over their heads and transform them to a 5th floor storage room until after the anticipated break-in.
What?
Wow.
Wait. They were moved to the 5th floor of the building they were in.
Right.
People saw them.
Well, okay, so listen to this, right? Here, I'm gonna get there. So when the conspirators came, Zimbardo would be sitting in his office alone and say, "Oh, the experiment is over. We're done with it." And then would move them back down to the prison to continue the experiment.
Excuse me?
That is unethical.
So that
What
all
is
of this is
happening?
unethical.
What the fuck is happening in this experiment?
Right.
What a fucking... This is day fucking 3?
Okay, also, I have a question. When you're reading this book, is he like, oh yeah, and then we did this. Thank God I thought of that. Anyway.
Right. Yeah,
like,
no, he was very
he
narcissistic.
doesn't feel bad.
But, he does acknowledge in the book that, like, he was completely in the wrong, that he himself was subject to the experiment, which made me, like, get some respect for him in the sense that, like...
Whatever.
But yeah, but also, fuck yourself.
Right.
Well, it's also too we can't place all the blame on him because he had an entire team. Like, you know,
Yeah,
I feel
everybody
like
on that entire experiment could just sit on a fucking
complicit.
couch.
You mean
Like,
the people in the experiment could resist the authority and speak up?
No. Like, the people who were advising it, like his research team, all of them are complicit.
But what I'm saying is, you mean that the people who were complicit in the experiment should have spoken to their authority, Phillip Zimbardo, and stopped the experiment from happening, right?
I don't know, man. Like, if it were me and I was, like, doing an internship or something, and that was what I was watching, I'd leave. Right, you think you would leave, but if a person... I guess!
No.
Right, but that's the whole thing. Isn't that so fucked up? They were being fucked over. Okay, so...
So it's a double experiment.
Right. So that's the whole thing. Is Zimbardo was talking about how it was an experiment for him himself as an individual and a person, and tested his own morality, which clearly he fucking failed.
Yeah.
So listen to this.
Oh, she's excited. That's a bad sign.
So when the conspirators came, I would be sitting there alone. I would tell them that the experiment was over and we had sent all their friends home, that there was nothing left to liberate. After they left, we'd bring back our prisoners back and redouble the security of our prison. This part is gonna fuck you up. We even thought of luring 8612 back on some pretext and then imprisoning him again because he was released on false pretenses. Isn't that...
I need to take a lap. My God.
What the fuck?
Isn't that just fucking mind-blowing to you? Okay.
I need to walk around this entire house right now.
I'm gonna need to eat like an entire fucking loaf of bread.
I'm ready
if
for
I'm gonna
it.
be honest. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, keep going. What day are we on?
This is 4?
4, I believe, yeah.
Okay.
Oh my
Fuck, okay, keep going.
Zimbardo was marathon through the last 2 days.
Right, yeah, it's pretty marathon-y. Nothing really traumatic happens. I mean, it does, but you know what I mean?
Is this the worst?
Yeah. So he was sitting alone, waiting for the intruders to come and break in. So Gordon had heard...
I'm gonna guess that literally no one comes and they're all paranoid.
Right. So Gordon Bauer, who was one of his Yale graduates, like students' roommates, had heard that he was doing an experiment and come to see what was going on. So then Zimbardo briefly described what they were doing. He literally saw him casually in the hallway. He was like, "Oh, hey Phil, what's going on?" You know? And Zimbardo was like, just doing a prison experiment study, the huge. And so Gordon goes, "Hey," and so he starts explaining it to him, and Gordon goes, "So what's the independent variable in the study?" Gordon's my man, alright? Gordon knows what's up, dude. I
stand Gordon.
Right, and so, to his surprise, Zimbardo got really angry.
Oh, wow.
He had a prison break on his hands. The security of the men stabilizing the prison was at stake, and now you had to deal with this idiot who was telling you, "Oh, what the fuck is the independent variable in my experiment? Where's the data? Where's the validity?
Where's your science? What kind of data are you looking for?"
Oh my God, just so fucking inconsiderate. Does not realize the kind of it's like, this is like when I play Sims and they start making free will choices that I just don't fundamentally agree with. And, then I have to intervene and, get them to quit their job at the grocery store so they can be a doctor.
Right.
It's just... I never get any fucking thanks.
Right.
For the amount of work that I put in.
So this is a quote from the website is the security of men and stability of my prison was at stake, and now I had to deal with this bleeding heart liberal academic ding dong.
Fucking feminazi over here.
Oh my God. I love literally just goes, yeah, so what's what's the independent variable that you're testing though? He's like, oh my God, bleeding heart liberals and their fucking human rights.
That's not even a human rights question. That he's just asking him, what are you testing for?
Yes.
Oh my God.
That's the only question is, what are you testing for? So, and he couldn't answer it, so he got pissed.
So
men.
Fuck.
So Olivia, surprisingly, was right. The rumor of the prison turned out to be just a rumor, and Zimbardo fell under paranoia. Imagine our reaction. We had spent an entire day planning to foil the escape. We begged the police department for help, moved our prisoners, dismantled most of the prison. We didn't even collect any data that day. Excuse me?
Man, and that's
an entire
that's
24
the
hours.
Worst part. Can you imagine that? Zero data? Oh, why are they even doing this?
Well, that's the thing. It's not an
they
experiment
even doing
anymore.
it?
It's not an experiment.
Can you imagine your biggest thought, too, is you're like, oh my, and we didn't even collect any data.
What
and
a
you're
waste.
So, yeah. The guards' behavior only escalated for their level of harassment, increasing the humiliation, forcing them to do menial, repetitive work, such as cleaning out toilet bowls, making their bed, saying, oh, your bed isn't made, remaking their bed, oh, your bed isn't made. A prisoner had to, this is also portrayed in the movie, a prisoner had to remake his bed 7 times and started flipping the bed over, getting angry because his bed was made. But it wasn't good enough for the guard, right? Push-ups, jumping jacks, whatever the guards could think of, basically increased the counts of several hours of each. Just made it harder and harder and harder for the prisoners. So they had a Catholic priest came in to evaluate how realistic the prison situation was.
Oh, God. Man, if he didn't like bleeding heart liberals before, he is not going to like this man's response.
So the Catholic priest interviewed them individually, and the prisoners introduced themselves as their number rather than their name. Half of them did.
Wow.
Good.
So after some talk, they the priest eventually asked them, "Son, what are you doing to get out of here?" Meaning, like, what are you doing to reform yourself? You know, because the point of prison is rehabilitation, not punishment, right? Essentially, in the grand scheme of things, right? In the idealistic world.
One would hope.
When the prisoners responded with puzzlement, he explained that the only way to get out of prison was with help of a lawyer. He then volunteered to contact the parent to get legal aid if they wanted him to. And some of the prisoners accepted his offer.
Whoa!
And again, this blurred the line between roleplay and reality. He was a real priest, but he learned to play a stereotype program role very, very, very well. Talking a certain way, folding his hands. He seemed more like a version of a priest than an actual real priest. Like, he was playing a role up, even in his own manner.
God, fuck, dude.
Wow.
The only prisoner who did not want to speak to the priest was prisoner number 819, who was feeling sick. He had refused to eat, wanted to see a doctor, then a priest. Right? He was eventually persuaded to come out of his cell and talk to the priest to see what kind of doctor he needed. While talking to us, he broke down and began to cry hysterically, just as the other boys that was released earlier. They took the chains off his feet, the cap off his head, and told him to go rest in a room that was adjacent to the prison yard. He said that he could get him some food and then take him to see the doctor. So while he was doing this, the guards lined up the other prisoners and had them chant aloud, number 819 is a bad prisoner because of what prisoner 819 did.
Oh my God.
My cell is a mess, my correctional officer. They shouted the statement in unison a dozen times. As soon as I realized this, 819 could hear the chanting. I raced back to the room where I had left him, and I was found a boy sobbing uncontrollably while in the background. His fellow prisoners were yelling that he was a bad prisoner. Longer was the chanting disorganized and full of fun. That's been on the first day, now it was marked by utter conformity and compliance, as if a single voice was saying, 819 is bad. I suggested he leave, but he refused. Through his tears, he could not leave because the others had labeled him a bad prisoner, even though he was feeling sick.
Fuck!
Go home!
He wanted to go back and prove he wasn't a bad prisoner.
No! Go home!
Fuck, dude.
So, listen, you are not number 819. You are his name. And my name is Dr. Zimbardo. I'm a psychologist, not a prison superintendent. And this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment, and those are students, not prisons. Just like you. Let's go. He stopped crying suddenly, looked at me like a small child, awakened from a nightmare, and replied, "Okay, let's go."
That's... Oh my God.
So now...
So he's down 2 people, and not down 2 people like they're like, hey, you know what? This isn't for me. I feel like I've thought about it, and like I kind of want to go home.
No,
like they literally
thorough.
broke him down into hysterics.
Yeah.
Refused to leave.
Breakdown.
And then was forced to leave. I feel like once that happens twice, it's time to stop.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So I think, actually, I have a correction. I think it was 819 that just did the chanting, not the other prisoner. But the other prisoner was asked to leave because of the mental breakdown.
Okay.
But, yeah. That was my bad. But also, yeah. I mean, still not great. So the next day, all the prisoners were asked to go see the parole board. Right? Which is a fake parole board that they had set up. And the board was composed mainly of people who were strangers to the actual prison itself. And it was actually headed by the top prison consultant that Zimbardo had hired for the prison.
Great. Good.
First, they asked the prisoners whether they would forfeit the money they had earned up to that time if we were to parole them. Meaning all their work for that money that they were getting paid $50 a day, they would forfeit.
Wait, what the fuck kind of question is that?
Well, most said yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then they ended the hearing by telling the prisoners to go back to their cells and they would consider their requests. Every prisoner obeyed, even though they could have obtained the same result by simply quitting the experiment. Why did they obey?
I mean, we know why.
Because they felt powerless to resist. Their sense of reality had shifted, and they no longer perceived them imprisonment as an experiment. In the psychological prison we had created, only the correctional staff had the power to grant paroles.
Okay.
During the parole experiment, they actually had one of the consultants kind of turn, in a sense. He literally became the most hated authoritarian official imaginable. So much so that when it was over, he felt sick at who he had become. Because he was a prisoner himself. So he just took on that role of what he saw in prison, and then immediately was like, oh shit, what did I do? He took on the role of his own tormentor who had previously rejected his annual parole request for 16 years when he was a prisoner.
Whew,
By
that's
the fifth
heavy.
day, new relationships had emerged between prisoners and guards. The guards now fell into their job more easily, jobs which at times were boring than interesting. There were mainly three types of guards. First, there were the tough but fair guards who allowed prison rules. Second, there were the good guys who did little favors for the prisoners and never punished them. And finally, about a third of the guards were hostile, arbitrary, and inventive in their forms of prison humiliation. The guards appeared to thoroughly enjoy the power wielded, yet none of our preliminary personality tests were able to predict this behavior. The only link between personality and prison behavior was a finding that prisoners with a high degree of authoritarianism endured our authoritarian prison environment longer than did other prisoners.
God.
Fuck. One of these authoritarian guards was John Wayne. The prisoners nicknamed this guard John Wayne because they learned that the most notorious guard in a Nazi prison near Buchenwald was named Tom Mix, the John Wayne of an earlier generation, because of his Wild West cowboy macho image in abusing camp inmates. So,
Holy
again,
crap.
Lincoln Nazis.
First of all, you're bringing Nazis into this. No one said Nazi, except for both of you.
You just want to clear up that you never said Nazi.
No.
Well, I'm just saying I haven't said... Wait, hold on. I might have said Nazi.
Nazi might have come out from my lips at one point.
Nobody except everyone said Nazi.
Right.
So
if you look at the actual prisoners' coping styles, they coped with their feelings of frustration in a variety of ways. First, some prisoners rebelled, right, fought with the guards, which we saw on day 2. 4 prisoners reacted by breaking down emotionally as a way to escape the situation. One prisoner developed a psychosomatic rash over his entire body, which he learned that his parole request had been turned down.
all right.
Others tried to cope by being good prisoners, doing everything the guards wanted them to. One of them was even nicknamed Sarge because he was so military-like in executing all commands.
Wow.
By the end of the study,
they're not even free yet. This is still going.
Right. We're at the very end, right? So by the end of the study,
hoping
the prisoners were disintegrated, both as a group and as individuals. There was no longer any group unity, just a bunch of isolated individuals hanging on, much like prisoners of war or hospitalized mental patients. The guards had won total control over the prisoners, and they commanded the blind obedience of each and every prisoner. The final act of rebellion was prisoner number 416 was newly admitted as a replacement for the other prisoner that had left.
They were adding people?
Yeah, no. So they had replacements on call.
Oh, right. I forgot.
So,
but still, like, they lost 2 people because they had complete emotional breakdowns, and they're like, "Oh man, though, our numbers are down."
Olivia, you got to continue with the study. You know what I mean?
Fuck. All right.
The show must go
on.
Also,
on a side note, isn't that going to affect the data because you have several people that have been there for 6 days?
Yeah.
This is exactly what in my notes it was. The prisoner had experienced a gradual escalation of harassment, and the prisoner's horror was full-blown when he arrived, and one of the old-timers told him that quitting was impossible, that it was actually a real prison. They, at this point, fully believed that it wasn't a study anymore. They
just assumed that they were actually going to be held there forever.
Oh my god.
So 416 started a hunger strike, refused to eat. The guards threw him in solitary confinement for 3 hours.
Wow.
Even though their own rules that they made said that the limit was 1 hour.
Whoa. Yikes.
So what do you think?
That's day one for him?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Well, I mean, it was his last day, essentially.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, Brie, but he didn't know it was his last day going in.
Right. Well, no, and that's absolutely fair. He was very committed to the movement of rebelling, right? Because when you're in the beginning of it, you have a lot of energy, not like the other prisoners. The other prisoners looked at him as a troublemaker. The head guard exploited his feelings by giving prisoners a choice. They could have him come out of solitary confinement, they're willing to give up their blanket, or they could leave him in solitary all night. Most elected to keep their blankets and let the fellow prisoners suffer in solitary all night. But Zimbardo, being a good guy, eventually intervened and let him return to his cell.
Oh yeah, such a good guy.
Well, thank God we got a good guy out there.
Good guy Zimbardo.
So, on the 5th night, some visiting parents asked Zimbardo to contact a lawyer in order to get their son out of prison. Mm-hmm. They said a Catholic priest had called them that they should get a lawyer or public defender if they wanted to bail their son out. Zimbardo called the lawyer as requested. No, yeah, full force. Everyone was in this. Called the lawyer as requested, with a set of legal questions, even though it was just a fucking experiment. At this point, it became clear that at this point, it became clear that they had to end the study. Sorry,
my God. Now it becomes clear.
I don't mean to laugh. It's just like, what told you this was it? Like, what was the...
Yeah, what did it?
Even the good guards felt helpless to intervene, and none of the guards quit while the study was in progress. Indeed, it should be noted that no guard ever came late for his shift, called in sick, left early, or demanded extra pay for overtime work.
Holy shit, I totally forgot that the guards were going home. So, like, they do this shit and just, like, shut it off and go home and live normal lives.
Well, I guess
like, while they're, like, beating the shit out of people.
100%. And they would tell, they would also, whenever there was, like, shift changes, they would brag about all the things that they would do during their shift. Like, oh, yeah, I made prisoner 881 remake his bed 12 times today. Oh, well, I'm going to make him remake it 14.
Holy fuck.
Mm-hmm. So, this is a quote from Zimbardo. I ended the study prematurely for 2 reasons. First, we had learned through videotapes that the guards were escalating their abuse of prisoners in the middle of the night when they thought no researchers were watching them.
Oh.
Their boredom had driven them to even more pornographic and degrading abuses of the prisoners.
I'm sorry. What?
So they would make them, they would make them bend over, to stimulate, like, sexual positions, would pretend that, like, to have one of the other prisoners fuck the other prisoners, not really actual intercourse or any sexual touching would happen. Right. But so, like, one of the prisoners would take another prisoner doggy style and pretend to fuck him while the other guards laughed.
Fuck?
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah, question. When did this happen the 5th day and they didn't end it?
No. This happened during the night. Like the 5th night when they thought nothing was happening and nothing was going on, when they thought the cameras were turned off and that surely the researchers weren't watching them, they would call the prisoners out of their cells and commit this act for their own amusement. So
these aren't normal people. These are sociopaths who haven't been diagnosed.
Well, honestly, I don't even think so. I think that's just...
Well, that's where the discussion comes in.
Fucking insane.
This is where the discussion comes in.
Communist China.
Mm-hmm. So,
but like,
yeah, I think what's more frightening is everyone is capable of doing shit like this.
Right. So I'm gonna highlight that and end the podcast with that. About some of my research that I've done past that of groupthink in today's society. But first, I want to talk about the second reason why he chose to end the experiment, which was the real fucking reason. The first reason was bullshit. He could have cared less because he had all that other shit leading up to it. He could have cared less about the dehumanizing acts because he saw all the fucking other shit. That was
It's
bullshit.
been going on this whole time.
The second reason he chose to end the experiment, being the main and only reason, was that Christina Maslach, I'm gonna butcher her name, Christina Maslach, was a recent Stanford PhD student, was brought to conduct interviews with the guards and prisoners, strongly objected when she saw our prisoners being marched on a toilet run with bags over their heads, legs chained together, hands on each other's shoulders, naked. Filled with rage, she said, "It's terrible what you are doing to these boys." Out of 50 or more outsiders who had seen our prison, she was the only one who ever questioned its morality. Once she countered the power of the situation, however, it became clear that the study should be ended. And so, after 6 days, the Stanford Prison Experiment was over. Because a woman stepped in. And let me tell you, ladies,
But of course. And the moral of the story is...
But he said, Zimbardo was quoted as saying it was like a trance to him, where she basically came in and pointed to these boys and went, "Are you fucking kidding me? These are human beings." And Zimbardo, like, woke up and was just like, "Yeah, you're right." And
sure.
I highly, highly encourage you to listen to the interviews between the guards and the prisoners after the experiment, because the interaction that the John Wayne guard, who was like the head leader of all the really traumatic shit that would happen between all the guards, was talking to the prisoner who broke down crying. I think it's 8612 was the bad prisoner. He was like, "You really hurt me. You hurt me." One of the things that was just so interesting, it gave me chills when I heard it, was the prisoner said, "Listen, I know you're not a bad guy, right?" And then the guard said, "You don't know that."
Whoa.
And then the prisoner said, "No, I know you're not a bad guy, you're just like me." And he goes, "No, you don't know that." And it gave me chills down my spine. So on August 20th, 1971, the experiment was officially terminated.
Wow.
The next day, there was an alleged escape attempt at San Quentin. Prisoners at the Maximum Adjustment Center were released from their cells by Soledad brother George Jackson, who had smuggled a gun into the prison. Several guards and some informant prisoners were tortured and murdered during this attempt, but the escape were prevented after the leader was allegedly gunned down while trying to scale the 30-foot-high prison walls.
Oh my god.
Less than 1 month later, prisoners made more news when a riot erupted at Attica Prison in New York. After weeks of negotiations with prisoners who held guards hostage while demanding basic human rights, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller ordered the National Guard to take back the prison by full force. A great many guards and prisoners were killed.
I think I watched a documentary on that.
And injured by that ill-advised decision. One of the major demands of the prisoners of Attica was that they be treated like human beings.
Wow.
After observing our simulated prison for only 6 days, we can understand how prisons dehumanize people, turning them into objects and instilling them in feelings of hopelessness. And as for the guards, we realized how ordinary people could be readily transformed from the good Dr. Jekyll to the evil Mr. Hyde. So this was really traumatic for me to look at, because I like to have a positive view of humanity and of people, because I'm a pretty optimistic person. But it was frightening. In one of the first chapters in Zimbardo's book about the Lucifer effect, it goes into much, much later detail. Again, highly recommend you guys reading it. Because he talks a lot about prison systems, especially just because it relates to his experiment and touches more to home with him.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really got me to think about it compared to everyday life was the rape of Rwanda, which he talks about in the prelude to actually going into the experiments that he conducted in the Lucifer effect. And I'm just going to read a couple passages of it now, but basically, so during this time, a UN report estimated that at least 200,000 women were raped during the brief period of horror, many of them killed afterwards. But basically, 800,000 and 1 million Rwandans were murdered in about 3 months, making the massacre the most ferocious in recorded history. 3/4 of the entire Tutsi population were exterminated, all because two rival tribes were battling each other. They were told by their leaders that their neighbors were no longer their peaceful neighbors anymore. Literally the next village over, that they had to kill their friends and family.
Oh my god.
I'm gonna go into something graphic, that we can cut out, or if you guys get uncomfortable, just let me know. But it's rape, so if you guys are okay with that, if not, it's totally cool.
I mean, I don't think anybody's okay with rape.
Right, no,
I'm not about rape. I'm just saying it's historical. I'm okay with
No, yeah, I can listen to that.
Right, but so some of this was women giving orders such as, before you kill the woman, you need to rape them. She ordered another group of these thugs to burn alive a group of 70 women and girls they were guarding and provided them with gasoline from her car to do so. Again, she invited the men to rape their victims before killing them. One of the young men told a translator they couldn't rape them because we had been killing all day and we were too tired. We just put the gasoline in bottles and scattered it among the women, then started burning. So, a 45... This one was the one that was really tough for me to read. Was a 45-year-old Rwandan woman was raped by her 12-year-old son.
Holy shit.
Holding a hatchet to his throat. With somebody holding a hatchet to his throat in front of her husband, while their 5 other young children were forced to hold open her thighs. And because the spread of AIDS was so prevalent in Rwanda at the time, a lot of people died after these rapes due to AIDS-related causes.
Sure.
And then, so see, these are some of the quotes from the people who were interviewed after these traumatic events happened. They were also told to kill with specifically machetes, which was, that's harsh. I mean, I think any form of killing is harsh, but that's really just horrible and gruesome. And it's some of these quotes were, "Since I was killing often, I began to feel it did not mean anything to me. I want to make clear that from the first gentleman I killed to the last, I was not sorry about a single one." Next quote was, "We were doing a job to order. We were lining up behind everyone's enthusiasm. We gathered into teams on the soccer field and went out hunting as kindred spirits. Anyone who hesitated to kill because of feelings of sadness absolutely had to watch his mouth, to say nothing about the reason for his resistance, for fear of being accused of complicity. We killed everyone we tracked down in the papyrus. We had no reason to choose, to expect or fear anyone in particular. We were cutters of acquaintances, cutters of neighbors, just plain cutters. Our Tutsi neighbors, we knew they were not guilty." This one gives me chills. Okay. "Our Tutsi neighbors, we knew they were not guilty of no misdoing, but we thought all Tutsis at fault for our constant troubles. We no longer looked at them one by one. We no longer stopped to recognize them as they had been, not even as colleagues. They had become a threat greater than all we had experienced together. More important than our way of seeing things in the community. That's how we reasoned and how we killed at the same time."
Oh my god.
I mean, that's not isolated. This is pretty similar to the rape of Nanjing, which was Jack was talking about. And he said one notable one that really fucked him up was they would throw babies and infants in the air and then catch them on bayonets.
Right. So the rape of Nanjing was also in the Lucifer Effect as one of the preludes. It was the rape of Nanjing, the rape of Rwanda, and I think there was one other prison that they talked about before going into the actual prison experiments themselves. And I think the biggest takeaway from today that I wanted to set up was that based on all of these studies I went through, and based on of what Brooke was saying, was because I thought I had the mentality of surely these tests that Zimbardo did to see who was prisoners and who were guards or who was fit to be in that position were done poorly, like the rest of the experiment, but done poorly because clearly they had to be psychopaths in order to do something like this, right? Yeah. Clearly something had to be wrong, but you look through and honestly, they can't all be psychopaths. A nation of people, they were just following orders and doing what they were told to do, and I think that shocks me.
I think the difference between the Stanford Prison Experiment and some of these other things that you're citing is that, like, in the Stanford Prison Experiment, they weren't following orders. They were making up their own.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but that's also an evolution of orders, right? I mean, the same thing happened in communist China. Mao didn't explicitly say, I want you to beat people to death. He said, I want you to rid of the four evils, right? And then as a result, whatever that was evolved over time, right? Like, all he told them was, you need to keep control. They defined what they needed to do that. Just like all of these other places in history, you need to keep control. You need to rid the world of people who are against the Communist Party. You need to protect the motherland. They defined those rules. And then at that point, it is completely out of your control what those rules are.
Right. And I think Brooke does have a point in the sense that, like, Stanford Prison Experiments, aren't the rape of Rwanda, you know?
Right, for sure.
Plenty of more awful things happened in the rape of Rwanda, but at the same time, it's the same thought process of, given the amount of power that these people are given, they will abuse that power. There's no way that you're not going to abuse that power, which to me translates over into present day, into just our natural lives of, if the wrong people come into power, they will abuse it. There's no evidence that shows that they'll go, you know what, I'm gonna weigh my morality out and take time to say, is this the right thing to do? Because if you have that power and if no one's looking, you're gonna abuse it. And you know, sorry, go on.
No, my question is, you said, like, you know, if the wrong people take power, I mean, obviously, you know, like, we don't want necessarily psychopaths to be running every aspect of the government. But my question is there anybody right for power? Because, like, when they did all of those tests for Stanford Prison, which, again, had so many fucking variables, but just, like, on a base level of the selection of candidates, they didn't have any outstanding mental illness. They took personality tests and were found to be normal, average guys, right? And they turned into complete monsters to the end where that guy, John Wayne, literally didn't believe he was a good person. Right. Like, he's like, you don't know who I am.
Yeah, I mean, Douglas Adams has a quote, I'm going to butcher it, but he has a quote that says that anybody who wants to be in politics or be a leader shouldn't be. But everyone who should doesn't want to.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty accurate. And, like, it's, you know, it's one of those things, too, where, like, I don't know, we have to create systems of government where you don't have unchecked power, because, like, based on everything that I saw with China, and, you know, I read a lot about those other examples, just, like, because I guess it's shit that I just read. Like, I don't know, I don't think there is truly anyone that's ripe for power that won't abuse it, right? Like, how there was one guy that didn't, you know, affect the least lethal, like, super lethal dose on the Milgram experiment because he was an electrician and he knew. Like, statistically, that's minuscule. Right. It was 1 out of, like, 200 plus people. Right. So, yeah, this, So
yeah, that's what's been keeping me up at night as of recent, ladies. It's
for good reason.
Right, and I think another thing to do is, I think the only hope that we have as a society and people is recognizing power and what powers that we have that we're abusing currently, and that what the abuse of power looks like, and to not fall into conformity. That's why privilege is such an important
idea.
Right. Yeah. And just in everyday lives, but yeah, I highly encourage y'all to read The Lucifer Effect, but not to buy it because Phillip Zimbardo is still profiting off of it. Also, Phillip Zimbardo faced 0 prison time or any form of justice for what he did during that experiment time. He still has his PhD.
Did any of the subjects of the experiment have any consequences?
Nope.
Wow.
Did they receive any counseling?
I'm sure they privately received counseling.
I mean, but, like, not through the study, not through Stanford.
The psychology department of Stanford did nothing.
Well, I mean, yeah, no.
What a great episode, guys. Really glad that we got together and got to talk about all this.
Fun times we've been having.
God, I don't really know how to end this. I feel like from here on out we should have, like, one fun, positive fact. And today I have nothing. So...
Well...
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can just end it on be aware of yourselves, be aware of your peers, don't conform to things that you don't think are right. Make constant judgment of yourself and your morality every day, because falling under that is really easy to do, and that we just need to be aware, and that's all we can do.
It's especially appropriate with the things that are happening today
in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know, man. I'm just left with this unnerving feeling that all of it is out of our control.
No, we're not.
Let's not stop it there.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that another time. For now, it's been real, guys.
It sure has. I hope this keeps you up at night.
Because it's going to keep me up at night.
All right, bye, guys.
Deuces.
Later.